Well, I mentioned Apple, but there are dozens more American household names criticized for not paying their fair share, often by stashing money away in tax havens. Consumer advocates, the Public Interest Research Group, claim $150 billion of taxable revenue is lost every year through legal means of moving money offshore. Owens is a tax expert with the organization. I asked her how the US government could recoup this lost money.
What these companies do is perfectly legal, and that's the issue that we're dealing with. Closing these loopholes, ending the incentives to shift profit offshore, and increasing transparency would completely eliminate most of the issues of companies moving their profits to overseas accounts.
Now, do you think all of the onus should be on US lawmakers, or should anyone else be stepping in? Should people outside of lawmakers be perhaps encouraging these companies to do more for themselves?
Yeah, I think so. I do think that the fastest track to solving the issue would be for Congress to do something to step up, because obviously if these companies are given the choice of paying 0% tax rate or paying any taxes at all, they're gonna choose to pay nothing. So, I think the biggest issue is the legality of it.
Now, as we look at some of these top destinations, for the top three, you have Bermuda, Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, all some of these top tax havens, according to the US government. Now, what do you think makes these destinations so popular as tax havens?
Well, when we talk about tax havens, we typically see three common characteristics. One is that they have little to no corporate tax rate, typically below 10%. Another is that there's a lack of disclosure to the proper foreign tax authorities. And the third is that there's a huge lack of transparency requirements. So that tends to be what makes them so desirable to US companies.
So having a lot of that vagueness allows people to kind of shift the funds around.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, as we look at some of the people living in these host countries, you don't have to put that money towards, it can just stay in the tax havens. It doesn't have to go towards building factories that would create jobs for the people living in these countries that are tax havens. So what's in it for these countries then? Why would they want to be tax havens for companies?
Well, typically the governments see profit from it, but the people don't. So the governments of these countries are the ones who are really being benefited, and it doesn't trickle down to the average person in the Cayman Islands or in Bermuda.
And perhaps do you think some sort of movement from people who see that in some cases these profits are bigger than the entire country's GDP? Do you think that's perhaps something at the grassroots level that perhaps people could demand more from their government so that they wouldn't be put in a position where they don't get to benefit at all?
Absolutely. I think that public pressure has a huge voice that can be leaned on these governments. So absolutely, I think that would be a great solution.
Now, we mentioned earlier about the US having one of the highest corporate income tax rates in the world. So if you're a company, you're looking at this huge tax rate of like 40% in the US, or shifting your funds to, as you say, countries where you're paying less than 10%. What is the incentive then to not just always shift your money overseas?
Well, that's the issue, right? But there was a recent report released that actually did a lot of investigating as to how many companies actually pay the 35% US tax rate. And I think most companies pay about an average of 12% tax rate in the US. There's a lot of deductions and credits that you can get. Not many companies pay a full 35%. But again, obviously, if you're tasked with paying even 12% versus 1 or 2%, you're going to pick 1 or 2% or even 0%. So there's not a big incentive, if it's totally legal, to move your profits back to the US.
And as we look at the top three companies that are holding the biggest profits overseas, Apple tops the list, followed by General Electric and Microsoft. Yet all these companies have denied being tax dodgers. They're all saying, they're paying huge amounts in taxes. So where's the middle ground?
Well, I think that what we're asking them is to repatriate the money that they've made in the U.S. back to the U.S. These companies aren't doing huge business in the Cayman Islands or in Bermuda. They do international business, but it's not in the places where they have these profits booked. Like you said, some of these profits are larger than the entire GDP of some of these countries. Obviously, these companies don't have a huge presence there. So we're asking them to pay for the privilege of doing business in the United States, to pay for our workforce, our infrastructure, and the benefits of operating in U.S. markets.